The air felt thick, almost as if the night itself had a weight that pressed down on everything. The moon, usually a comfort, was hidden behind a blanket of dark, swirling clouds. The woods on the outskirts of town had always been known for their strange noises and eerie atmosphere, but tonight, something was different. It was as if the woods were alive, watching, waiting. Clara's breath came in shallow gasps as she sprinted down the narrow dirt path, her feet pounding against the ground. She could feel it behind her, the thing that had been following her ever since she and her friends had stupidly ventured into the woods earlier that day. She had been the last one to flee, the last one to hear its low, raspy voice calling out from the shadows. At first, they had all laughed, brushing off the stories of the haunted forest as local folklore. But now, with her heart racing and her mind on the edge of panic, Clara knew the truth. She didn't dare look back, not now. Every instinct in her body screamed to keep running, but the more she tried to push forward, the harder it became. Her legs felt heavy, her vision began to blur, and her lungs burned with every breath. Whatever was behind her was gaining ground. She could hear its soft, shuffling footsteps, far too quiet for something so large, yet close enough that she could almost feel its presence just inches away. It had started out as a dare. Clara, Mike, Lacey, and Jordan had been talking about the old stories surrounding the woods after school. Mike, always the bravest or the most foolish, had suggested they go check it out. Just to see, he had said with that crooked grin of his. What's the worst that could happen? Now, Clara was alone. The others had disappeared, one by one. It had all happened so fast. 1 minute they were laughing, joking about the creaking branches and strange animal sounds in the distance. The next, Jordan had screamed a sharp, blood-curdling scream that still echoed in Clara's mind. When she had turned to look, he was gone. There had been no sign of a struggle, no footprints leading away. Just gone. They had searched for him, calling out his name, but the deeper they went into the woods, the stranger everything became. The trees seemed to close in around them, their branches twisting and curling as if they were alive. The ground became soft and marshy, almost as if the earth itself was trying to swallow them whole. And then, the voice had come. Low, guttural, and full of malice. It had whispered their names, taunting them, promising that they would never leave. The sun had dipped below the horizon before they realized how lost they were. Panic had set in. Lacey had broken down, sobbing uncontrollably, while Mike tried to calm her. Clara had kept scanning the trees, sure that something was watching them. And then, it happened again. Lacey had been standing right next to Clara when she disappeared. There was no warning, no sound, just a blink of an eye, and Lacey was gone. That's when they had started running. Mike had taken the lead, but his pace had slowed as the darkness thickened around them. And then, the voice had whispered again. Come to me. Clara had turned to see Mike frozen in place, his eyes wide with terror. Before she could reach him, the shadows had swallowed him too. She was the last one left. Now, as she pushed herself to keep moving, she felt her strength beginning to fade. Her legs wobbled, her vision darkened at the edges. She could hear the thing behind her closer, its breath hot on her neck. Clara stumbled, her foot catching on a root, and she fell hard to the ground. Pain shot up her leg, but she didn't care. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, desperately trying to put some distance between herself and whatever was hunting her. The woods seemed to close in tighter, the trees bending unnaturally towards her. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the ground beneath her hands felt wet and sticky. She tried to stand but collapsed again, her body betraying her in her time of need. Then, just as she thought it was over, she saw a light in the distance. A faint, flickering glow that seemed impossibly far away but was her only hope. She forced herself to her feet, her entire body trembling with fear and exhaustion. She limped towards the light, praying with every ounce of strength she had left that it wasn't a trick, that it wasn't part of the nightmare that had swallowed her friends. As Clara drew closer, the light grew brighter, revealing a small clearing in the middle of the woods. In the center stood an old, decrepit cabin, its windows glowing with the soft light of candles. She hesitated for a moment, her instincts screaming at her to stay away. But she had no choice. Whatever was following her was still out there, lurking just beyond the tree line. She staggered towards the cabin, her hand trembling as she reached for the door. It creaked open slowly, revealing a small, dusty room filled with old furniture and strange, shadowy shapes. The air inside was thick and heavy, but the warmth of the fire in the corner was a welcome relief. Clara stumbled inside and slammed the door behind her, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, there was silence. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and her ragged breathing. She allowed herself to hope just for a second that she was safe. But then, she heard it again. The voice. Soft, almost tender now, as if it were speaking directly into her mind. "Welcome, Clara. I've been waiting for you." She froze, her blood turning to ice in her veins. Slowly, she turned to face the room. The shadows seemed to shift and move, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. Faces appeared in the darkness, twisted, grotesque faces that smiled at her with wicked intent. She backed away, her hand fumbling for the door, but it was too late. The cabin was alive. The walls pulsed and breathed like a living creature, and the floor beneath her feet began to buckle and warp. And then, she saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and thin, with eyes that gleamed like burning coals. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, and its mouth twisted into a grin that made Clara's stomach churn. "You should have stayed away," it whispered, its voice a cold hiss. "But now, you belong to me." Clara tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure stepped closer, its bony fingers reaching out to touch her face. She could feel its cold breath on her skin, its icy fingers brushing against her cheek. She wanted to run, to fight, but her body refused to obey. The shadows wrapped around her, pulling her deeper into the darkness, and the last thing she heard was the sound of her own heartbeat, growing slower and slower until it faded away completely. In the days that followed, the town searched for Clara and her friends, but they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, just the endless, silent woods. The stories of the haunted forest grew stronger, and soon, no one dared to venture near it. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon was hidden behind the clouds, people swore they could hear a voice calling from the woods. A soft, ghostly whisper that echoed through the trees, beckoning them to come closer. And those who listened never returned.